Thank you, Tani. So, thank you all for being here. So this is going to be an interesting little talk. I'm going to be talking about some of the early women that got their start in VR. It's often said, of course, that VR is dominated by guys and that women didn't have much to do with the early days of VR. But while it is true that we owe much of the foundational work of creating the original technological underpinnings of VR to people like Ivan Sutherland and Tom Furness and their teams, it wasn't long before women began to make significant contributions to this emerging medium. An article from a 1993 Virtual Reality Systems magazine, which among other offerings showcased some of the women working in VR at the time, 7 of them were able to get together in San Francisco for this picture. Note Ann Laskell-Harville holding her new baby in the picture. But I want to show you what happened to this picture when the publication worked its magic on the group portrait. Yeah, maybe because the baby was a boy, I don't know. In any case, it shows what we were up against at the time. As part of my doctoral dissertation, I did in-depth research to chronicle the first 100 artistic VR works that had been made up to that time, which was 2007. Once I had them all in a spreadsheet, I discovered that of these 100 works, 65 of them were created, led by, or produced by women. And that was a real surprise given the prevailing thought that VR was made by and for guys. But still, in 1993, you could write the names of almost every woman working in VR on one napkin, as Suzanne Weghorst did here. Besides artistic input, where the content and approach to the new medium was often groundbreaking and innovative, women contributed in many other ways, from hardware to software to promoting to evangelizing to writing to envisioning the future that was about to break loose. And in 20 minutes, I can only start to tell some of their stories, but as you will see, there are many that need to be known and recognized. Some have been included in the XR Hall of Fame, some have yet to be honored. But without these women, we would be thinking very differently about VR. They helped steer it to be a more creative medium. So for this talk, I'm focused on the late 1980s and through the 1990s. In the last 10 years, I'm delighted to say there are many more following in these original footsteps. But today, we're going to celebrate that very early creativity in the new medium of VR and invite you to recognize and honor the impactful presence these women have had on the emerging VR landscape. Because these were women who had families, and maybe because of this, or in spite of this, they made incredible contributions to the beginning of what we now know as VR or XR. One helped revise an entire industry, launching a product with a 2-week-old baby in tow. One helped us realize our true lobster self and made the first avatar face. One helped us to see better. One brought touch into VR. One created the first spatialized sound for VR. And many made VR artworks unlike anything the world had ever seen. I will cover 6 of these formidable creators in a bit more depth in this short amount of time. Other stories can and will follow. Here you will meet artists, engineers, inventors, scientists, researchers, and more who influenced our immersive futures. Let's get started. So the first person is Linda Jacobson, who is here with us today. Linda's start in the VR world happened in 1989 when she began reporting on NASA's 3D binaural audio and VR research for recording industry magazines. In 1990, she co-produced the first conference for artists who were using VR and digital media. It was called Cyber Arts, as well as founding the Northern California's first virtual reality user group. In 1995, Linda became Silicon Graphics VR Evangelist, what a title, and introduced VR to thousands of business, academic, medical, and government leaders. This photo of her was from about 1998 when Fast Company sent a photographer to document the life of a VR evangelist. The Cyber Arts conference she started led to her groundbreaking book, Cyber Arts. And soon she began working with VR developers, covering the work of anybody who was anybody in VR at the time. Linda was also a co-founding editor of Wired magazine and served as Wired's virtual world editor. Her articles in Wired about do-it-yourself VR led to the publication of her book, Garage Virtual Reality, which came with a floppy disk of VR code, which I think I still have. During her time as SGI's evangelist, Linda formed and organized the International VR Experts Group to encourage cross-functional collaboration and bring together engineers, developers, scientists, and more to form integration partnerships. I remember that first inaugural meeting. And while at SGI in 1996, she also wrote and produced the award-winning documentary on enterprise VR called 6 Degrees of Freedom: Designers and Engineers Put Virtual Reality to Work. And as if was not enough, Linda also joined a multimedia arts ensemble managing the all-woman band Dukuku and becoming an early motion capture performance artist touring the country as Rigby, RGB. Dukuku worked closely with members of the Grateful Dead as well as Brian Eno and other electronic musicians. And for a while, this led to Linda being tagged as the Queen of VR. Linda was the personality and voice of Dukuku's 3D band member, Rigby, who would banter with the band between songs and interact with the audience. The movement of Rigby's lips was controlled by the amplitude of Linda's voice, which ran through a vocal effects processor. Everything that happened with Rigby was spontaneous and in the moment. Later in 2001, Linda co-founded a VR studio called Glasshouse Studio with cave inventor Carolina Cruz-Niera and fellow pioneers Steve Hansted and Christian Gruhl. Since 2009, Linda's research interests have centered on VR therapeutics and elder care with multiple successful company and product launches. She is one of the first to bring VR into the elder care communities starting in 2015 and has since introduced VR to many care providers and elders. For this work, she was invited to join the National Honor Society for Gerontologists. In 2022, Linda joined Haptex to help contribute to the growing use of advanced touch simulation in virtual reality and robotics, and to help the XR community define, implement, and share best practices in haptics. If you can, stop by the Haptics booth and meet Linda, or meet her here, or just show your respect with a bit of applause here. Give it up for the original Queen of VR. Okay, next we have Tamako Thiel. Tamako has been at the forefront of virtual world creation using both VR and AR from the very first moment it was possible to work with these mediums. She has been prolific in the advancement of XR as an artistic medium. She was the creative director of Steven Spielberg's Starbright World, a private online community for critically ill children, which launched in the mid-1990s. Her artworks are numerous, from her early piece Beyond Manzanar, done with creative partner Zara Hushman, using the then new Vermal platform. Beyond Manzanar puts the participant inside a Japanese concentration camp from World War II and shows how people lived then. But the experience eventually turns into what happened with the Iranian-American dream as it died decades later. So it was a real collaboration showing that we really hadn't come that far. Beyond Manzanar was followed by works such as The Travels of Mariko Horo and the Berlin Wall piece called Reconstructing the Wall, which won an IBM Innovation Prize. Tamako was the first VR artist to be collected by a museum. In 2002, the San Jose Museum of Art collected Beyond Manzanar. And this has led to some really interesting reflections about how can a museum keep such works from becoming obsolete? And Tamako does much of the updating of her own museum works. She has also created a stunning number of AR works and interventions. In fact, there's almost always a political or social message in most of her art. She was a Google Tilt Brush artist in 2017 and has had a significant influence on other things besides XR art. She was the person who helped design, let's see, get this, Why are we not coming up? There we go. She helped design this machine, the Thinking Machines Corporation Connection Machine, and this was 1983-85. She doesn't take credit for anything about the machine except how cool it looked, and it was really cool. This year, in addition to being inducted into the XR Hall of Fame, Tomiko is being honored with the ACM SIGGRAPH's highest art award, the Distinguished Artist Award for Lifetime Achievement in Digital Arts. Let's have some applause for this amazing artist. Next, we have Ann Lasko-Harville. Ann came from an industrial design background and became the chief designer of data suits in the early VR company VPL, founded by Jaron Lanier and Tom Zimmerman. It was a tight-knit team at VPL, with Ann and her husband, Young Harville, and others working on all the different needs for the emerging VR system. Ann and Young both produced concept drawings of what VR experiences might be like. Ann was responsible for multiple implementation aspects at VPL, while Young created the modeling software that Ann used to create the first avatar for VR. Not only did Ann make that first avatar, but when Jaron mentioned to a visitor that you could be a lobster in VR, he turned to Ann and said, can you make us a lobster in VR? So she had to figure out an avatar that had non-human characteristics. As claws were the sort of quintessential aspect of a lobster, the participants' arms were mapped onto the digital claws, and the rest of the appendages moved algorithmically based on the main movements. In the late 1980s, Ann spearheaded the development of VPL's Reality Built for Two whole-body VR suit. RB2, a groundbreaking virtual reality tool, was developed to enable multi-user interaction in virtual spaces. She also designed new user interface paradigms and devices for networked virtual reality, but always with an eye to the human who would be part of the system. Ann was also the woman in the photo with the baby that I showed at the start of the talk. And her family was a big part of the day-to-day team at VPL. They often had family dinners right there in the offices. Let's recognize Ann Lasko-Harville. Beth Marcus may not be a name you recognize, but her engineering work goes back to the late 1980s. With degrees in mechanical engineering from MIT and in biomechanics from Imperial College London, in 1988, she founded a company called Exos to build a better glove for VR and robotics, which soon found even more applications. Now, in the late 1980s, we certainly had VR gloves that were being used for both navigation and grasping virtual objects, but Beth's version, which had a unique exoskeleton that you can see in this picture, provided force feedback. In other words, you could actually feel something of the virtual object that you were interacting with in the VR space. Her dexterous handmaster brought haptics into focus in immersive media. Now we knew we needed this. We are still trying to get haptics right today, following in Beth's footsteps, or more accurately, her hand grasps. Her company, Exos, also created force feedback systems for game companies, for example, the Power Stick and the Sidewinder force feedback joysticks that were sold to a multinational technology company in 1996. And there was also work for NASA, such as this force feedback exoskeleton called the Armmaster that used an SGI computer and a head-mounted display for simulation of the space shuttle arm that let you feel the edges and the surfaces and push against objects. And there were many more uses for these haptic gloves, and she was one of the first to implement them. They were excellent to measure people's hand motions, evaluating finger and combined hand and wrist forces, and that could be used for rehabilitation and to determine fatigue. And after decades as a serial founder and mentor to many startups, Beth now works at Amazon's robotic division, where she has been working on this robot system called Robin. And working with Amazon has allowed her to see the impact of her work firsthand in the robots that are deployed and gainfully employed all over the world. And as part of the work, Beth continues to mentor young engineers and women to innovate and create the future. She's an acknowledged expert in the hand-device interface space and a leader in the early field of virtual reality, and definitely a name you should know. And there you have an introduction to Beth Marcus. Now, here's another new name for most of you, Angela Pate. Has anybody ever heard of Angela Pate before? Okay. Angela and her spouse, Millard, founded a company called Micron Green in the 1980s for the architecture and building industries, doing things like calculating the stresses and potential failures for major buildings in the southeastern United States. As you can imagine, there was a lot of mathematics involved, like finite element analysis, but little in the way of visualizations of those endless numbers the computers were spewing out. Along came computer graphics, and Micron Green became a leader in using this new technology to help their clients understand what the effects of their design decisions would have on the structural integrity of their buildings. The infrastructure back then between engineering software and computer graphics flying logo software was not yet in place. So this is the 1980s. Micron Green wrote much of the deep-level translators and drivers to get these two systems talking. Much of their work was integrated in Autodesk's emerging cyberspace development kit, making it more useful and robust. Now, I was fortunate to work on a groundbreaking project with Angela and her team in the 1990s to create a virtual reality system called the Virtual Environment Navigator. This was funded in part by the state of Florida and done at the UCF Institute for Simulation and Training. This software was launched at the 1992 SIGGRAPH, where Angela gave workshops and presentations, as well as active demonstrations at a booth on the expo floor, all with a 2-week-old baby in tow. Can I have a round of applause for that incredible feat? So the Virtual Environment Navigator would allow 2 or more people to enter into a CAD model together and discuss and change the design in real time. This blew the clients' minds back then. This is me working on the Navigator. It was a pose shot, so I didn't have the headset on. But I had this custom interface wand that I built for this system. The system was also used by groups like the Boston Cyber Arts Group to make a walkthrough of an ancient Aztec temple for the 1993 SIGGRAPH Emerging Technologies venue. A unique thing that Micron Green did was, for their clients, was to use the systems to enhance 3D visualization models. So after modeling and rendering in 3D, Angela would use paint programs to lay in the sunsets, both in the sky and reflected, somewhat impossibly, in all the windows. In what she called a mesmerizing process, she pushed those pixels back and forth for days, making sure the sunset was on every pane of glass. That was radical back then, and their customers loved it. And in fact, the image on the right won the True Vision Art Contest, second place winner in 1989. And True Vision was the company that made the graphics boards that most paint systems used then. Micron Green was extremely successful with VR Navigator and their other technologies over the next decade. They were a money-making company throughout the 90s, and nobody knows about them, but they made millions. Now Angela has added oil paint to her pixels and models, and here you see some of her most recent canvases, Moonscape and Another Amazing Sunset. Angela Pate, everybody. Now, Margaret Delinsky is our last featured Formidable creator. She was one of the talented MFA students in the Electronic Visualization Lab at the University of Illinois at Chicago in the 1990s. Artists there were able to use the newly invented immersive cave system conceived, built, and patented by Carolina Cruz-Niera, Dan Sandin, and Tom DeFanti. Carolina? Yeah! Margaret made many immersive works using the cave in the 1990s, and all were unique in incorporating her painterly elements from her symbolic artwork and canvases. Her first cave piece included a character who juggled colored spheres and who lived in a room totally decorated with her own paintings. Her work, Dream Girls, was shown in SIGGRAPH 1996, and it invited the participant to explore dreaming in a labyrinth and discover paths that led to whimsical worlds where you might ride a seesaw in the clouds or be shaken when you looked into the face of an unfamiliar psyche. This was followed by the work of Straight Dope in 1997, and Interiors, there's a picture from on the right, in 1998. This image shows part of her 1999 blue window pane piece, and this was featured at the prestigious Ars Electronica show. Later in the 1990s, she made blue window pane too. And finally, this image shows a bit from Figuratively Speaking in 2010, where the main 3D characters are based on watercolor paintings and have captivating but incomparable voices. And Margaret is still doing work in this medium today, making her an artist with one of the longest continuous histories of creating such works. A round of applause for Margaret and all of these intrepid pioneers. And we're not done. I mean, I can't call everybody out. There's not enough time in this presentation. But these women help make the amazing worlds we find ourselves in today. Here are just a few more, with the promise there'll be more stories in the 2-volume history of virtual reality I'm currently writing. So first, Mary Whitten. Mary Whitten was part of the early VR team at UNC, so early that she was building a matrix multiplier board for use in real-time computer graphics before most of us were even thinking about what hardware we needed. Elizabeth Wenzel helped invent the convolvatron while at NASA Ames Research Center, where she still works as a senior research audio psychologist. This was the first truly spatialized sound system for VR, and a system I would get to know very well. Rebecca Allen, besides being a noted creator of several immersive VR works, Rebecca was a chair and research professor at UCLA's design department, as well as the director of Nokia research in their centers in Hollywood and Cambridge. Before her VR work, she made the animated heads for the German band Kraftwerk. Janique Rowland, a preeminent optical scientist and professor of optics at the University of Central Florida, among other positions, Janique's work in optics has contributed to better head-worn display technology. Kay Stanny trained as an industrial engineer, and her work is focused on the human factors of immersive technology, including deep dives into the causes and cures for cyber sickness in immersive systems. And Josephine Anstey, like her colleague Margaret Delinsky, has an MFA from the Electronic Visualization Laboratory at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her work in immersive cave VR includes the breakthrough early VR narrative work, The Thing Growing, which was designed to evoke strong emotional responses from its participants, and boy, it really did. You can't experience some of these, but you can go see documentation on them. So here's a word cloud with some more names that I didn't get to today. So there's many, many more you should know, and some are in the XR Hall of Fame and some are not. While it may seem like this is a lot of women, there are others yet unknown from those early days. I know some of these names today are new to you. I've been fortunate to know about them, to have worked with some of them, and to have benefited from all the boundaries they shattered. We need more. Women bring unique perspectives, softening the hard lines and boundaries of technology. So to all the women working in this latest wave of VR, I urge you to keep on creating, keep on leading the way. And thank you all for attending. I am